My parents spent my entire childhood telling me I could tell them anything. Last Thanksgiving, I believed them. I told them everything. All of it. And I have not recovered from what happened next. I'm 28. I've been in therapy for 3 years. I'm telling this story now because my therapist, Claire, said writing it out might help me stop carrying it around in my chest like a stone. She didn't say post it on Reddit, but here we are. First, some context about my parents. My mom and dad are the kind of people who go to a lot of effort to appear emotionally intelligent. They read the right books. They used words like boundaries and safe space before those words were everywhere. Growing up, our house had a rule, and they said this constantly at dinner tables, during car rides, in the margins of birthday cards, which was, "You can always tell us the truth, no matter what. This is a house where honesty is safe." They said it so often I started to believe it was actually true. That was my first mistake. What I held in. I want to be clear that none of what I was carrying was catastrophic in isolation. I wasn't hiding a secret family or a felony. It was the ordinary accumulation of things a kid swallows over years because the gap between "we want you to be honest" and "we can actually handle honesty" turns out to be enormous. Here's some of what I had never said out loud to them. When I was 14, I quit the travel soccer team they'd invested years and thousands of dollars in, but I told them I got cut. I was never cut. I walked into Coach Reyes's office and asked to be removed from the roster because I had been quietly miserable for 2 years and I didn't know how to tell 2 people who filmed every game and drove 4 hours to tournaments that I had stopped caring. I let them believe I'd failed so they wouldn't feel like I'd rejected something they loved. When I was 17, I got into NYU. I didn't tell them. I deferred for a year without their knowledge, told them I was waitlisted, and then let the acceptance quietly expire because I was terrified of moving to New York and had no language for that fear that didn't sound weak. I went to our state school instead and told myself I preferred it. I did not prefer it. When I was 19, during a stretch of about 8 months, I was in a genuinely dark place. Not dangerous. I want to be careful about how I say this, but the kind of gray, airless depression that makes you feel like you're watching your own life through glass. I said nothing. I smiled at Christmas. I answered tired, just tired, when they asked what was wrong. I didn't tell them because the one time, years earlier, that I'd cried in front of my dad about feeling lonely at school, he'd gotten visibly uncomfortable and changed the subject to whether I was eating enough protein. There's more, but you get the shape of it. Why Thanksgiving? I don't have a dramatic answer. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a decision I made in advance with a list and talking points. What happened is that we were sitting at the table after dinner. My parents, my Aunt Carol, my younger brother Theo, and my mom made an offhand comment about how she and my dad had always been so proud of the relationship they'd built with us. How lucky they felt that their kids had never been afraid to come to them. How some of her friends had children who kept secrets for years, and she just couldn't imagine that, because in this house, we'd always been open. She said it warmly. She meant it completely. And something in me just released. Not in an angry way. Not with any plan. It was more like a pressure valve. 8 months of therapy, 3 years of slowly learning to name things, and my mother sitting across from me with absolute sincerity, saying we always knew everything. I put down my fork. I said, "Can I tell you guys some things I've never said before?" My mom smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart. Always." The truth dump. I talked for maybe 40 minutes. I don't fully remember the order. I remember Theo going very still. I remember my Aunt Carol at some point quietly excusing herself to the kitchen and not coming back. I remember my dad's jaw doing something complicated. I told them about the soccer team. I watched my mom's face move through confusion and then something that looked like grief. I told them about NYU. That one landed hard. My dad said, "You got into NYU?" in a voice I'd never heard from him, flat and quiet, and I said yes, and explained the deferral and the expiration and the state school and the fear I didn't have words for at 17. I told them about the 8 months at 19. I was careful. I was clinical almost. I said, I was depressed. I didn't feel like I could tell you. I looked at my dad when I said the second part. I told them a few other smaller things, opinions I'd hidden, choices I'd softened, versions of myself I'd edited for their comfort. And then I stopped. and the table was very quiet. My mom was crying. Not dramatically, just steadily, in that way where someone has been crying for a few minutes without fully acknowledging it to themselves. My dad was looking at the tablecloth. What I expected. I want to be honest about this part, because I think it matters. I expected defensiveness. I had braced for it. I'd even rehearsed, in some dim corner of my mind, how I'd respond if my dad said something like we did our best, or if my mom reframed everything as evidence of how much they'd sacrificed. I'd spent 3 years in therapy partly preparing for a conversation like this, and I knew the most likely outcome was a polite, painful impasse. I did not expect what actually happened, what my dad did. My father is a 61-year-old civil engineer who coached Little League for 9 years and has, to my knowledge, cried in front of another human being approximately twice. He is the protein comment. He is the subject change. He is the firm handshake and the practical advice and the way he says, "You'll be all right," as both a comfort and a termination of the conversation. He sat at that table for probably 2 full minutes without speaking. And then he said, "I knew something was wrong that year. The year you were 19. I knew, and I didn't ask because I didn't know what to do if the answer was something I couldn't fix." Just like that. No preamble. He looked up from the tablecloth. He said, "I think we told you that you could tell us things because we needed to believe we were the kind of parents you could tell things to. That's not the same as actually being those parents. I'm sorry I wasn't that." My mother made a sound I had never heard her make. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He said, one more time, quietly, "NYU. God." And then he pressed his fingers to his eyes and didn't say anything else for a while. We didn't resolve everything that night. I want to be honest about that too, because I think Reddit has a tendency to want clean endings, and this one isn't clean. My mom oscillated between genuine remorse and a kind of hurt that felt like it was redirecting toward me, and we've had some hard conversations since that haven't gone well. But my dad and I have talked 3 times on the phone in the past 6 weeks. Real conversations. Longer than we've ever had. He asked me on the second call what NYU would have been like. Just what did I think it would have been like? And I told him. And he listened. That's new. That's genuinely new. I'm not rebuilding some fantasy of the parents I wished I'd had. I'm 28. I know who they are. But something cracked open at that table, and what came out of my father, that admission, that specific, quiet ownership of his own failure, was more than I'd gotten in 28 years combined. My therapist, Claire, when I told her, said, "How did that feel?" I said I didn't have a word for it yet. She said that was okay. That sometimes you have to live inside the feeling for a while before it becomes a word. I guess I'm still living inside it. If you grew up in a house where honesty was more of a brand than a practice, you're not alone. And if you have kids, mean it or don't say it. Just please don't say it.